I left my dog with her because I thought she loved me. I left him with her because she kissed his head and called him our baby. She said, "Don't worry, sir, I'll treat him like family." The next morning, he was gone. Sold for $70. That dog was the only thing in my life that had never let me down. I found Melvy through one of those expat Facebook groups in Dumaguete. You know the type. Lonely old men posting pictures of their breakfast, asking where to buy decent coffee, complaining about the heat. I wasn't much different. I needed help with light chores and someone to keep Max company during my hip surgery recovery. The post got 12 responses. Most wanted too much money. Some couldn't speak English well enough. But Melvy's message was different. "I love dogs, sir. I will take good care of him." Simple. Honest. Or so I thought. She showed up the next morning in a faded yellow dress, carrying a small bag of dog treats. Max was suspicious at first. He always was with strangers. But when she knelt down and let him sniff her hand, something changed. "Hello, handsome boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "What's your name?" I told her it was Max. She smiled. Max, strong name for a strong dog. He was 7 years old, mixed breed, brown and white with one floppy ear that never stood up straight. The vet said he had maybe 5 good years left. I wanted them to be comfortable years. "I can come every day," she said, still petting Max. "Morning and evening. Make sure he eats. Take him for walks. Keep him company." Her English was better than most. Soft accent, careful pronunciation. She was 26, she said, had experience caring for elderly foreigners and their pets. "How much?" I asked. She quoted a reasonable rate. "Too reasonable, actually." "That's not enough," I told her. "I'll pay you double." She blushed. "Thank you, sir. You're very kind." Max was already lying down next to her feet. That should have been my first sign. Within a week, she wasn't just working for me. She was living here, not officially. She'd arrive at sunrise, leave after dinner, but her bag got bigger each day. Then she started bringing a pillow. "My place is far, sir," she explained, "and Max gets lonely at night. Listen." We both stopped talking. Max was whimpering by the door. "See, he misses me already." I felt something warm in my chest. When was the last time anyone missed me? "You can stay in the spare room if you want," I offered. She shook her head. "The couch is fine. I just want to be close to our baby." "Our baby," she said it so naturally. Like we were a real family. Like Max belonged to both of us. I'd catch her talking to him when she thought I wasn't listening. "Daddy's getting old, isn't he?" She'd whisper. "But don't worry. Mama's here now." I should have corrected her. Should have established boundaries. Instead, I started buying her favorite soap. Started cooking dinner for 2. Started giving her rides to the market, to her friend's house, to wherever she needed to go. "You're spoiling me, sir," she said one evening, curled up on the couch with Max's head in her lap. I've never had someone treat me so well. I felt proud, useful. Like maybe I wasn't just another desperate old expat after all. "You take good care of us," I replied. "It's only fair." She looked up at me with those big dark eyes. "Us," she repeated, smiling. I liked that word. Max's tail thumped against the cushions. Even he seemed to approve. The money started small. "My brother's sick," she said one morning, looking embarrassed. "He needs medicine. Can you loan me 2,000 pesos? Of course I could. "My sister's rent is due. Another 3,000. "My phone's broken. 500 for a new one." I never asked for receipts. Never asked when she'd pay me back. She was taking care of the most important thing in my world. What was money compared to that? By the end of the first month, I realized I didn't know what my life looked like without her. She'd wake up before me, already brewing coffee, already feeding Max. "Good morning, sir," she'd say, bringing me my cup. "Max has been waiting for you to get up, haven't you, baby?" He'd run to me, tail wagging, but then return to her side. Like he had 2 parents now. Like this was how things were supposed to be. "Melvy," I said one night, watching her brush Max's fur on the living room floor. "What's going to happen when I don't need a caregiver anymore?" She stopped brushing. Max looked up at her, sensing the change in mood. "What do you mean, sir?" she asked quietly. "I mean, my hip's getting better. I can walk longer distances now, take Max out myself." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You'll always need me, sir. Max will make sure of that. She kissed the top of his head. Won't you, our baby? I thought she meant Max would miss her too much for her to leave. I thought she meant we'd become a permanent family. I was right about one thing. Max would make sure I always needed her. But not in the way I imagined. Melvy's stories came in pieces, like a puzzle I had to assemble myself. My mother died when I was 12. She told me one evening while we watched Max chase lizards in the yard. Cancer, very painful. She said it matter-of-factly, but I saw her wipe her eyes. I'm sorry, I said. She shrugged. My older sister raised me after that, but she was cruel, always angry, always blaming me for things. I wanted to comfort her, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way she glanced at me while telling the story, like she was watching for my reaction. That's why I don't trust men, she continued. My sister always brought home boyfriends. Bad men, drunk men. They'd look at me wrong, say things. She wrapped her arms around herself. I learned to be invisible. Max trotted back to us and settled between her legs. She stroked his fur absently. But you're different, sir. You're kind. Safe. The word hung in the air between us. Safe. Is that what I was to her? A safe harbor in a dangerous world? Or just a safe bet? She never asked to sleep in the spare bedroom, just started appearing there. First it was, the couch is too hard, sir. My back hurts. Then, Max keeps crying when I'm in the living room. He wants to sleep near both of us. I found her one morning curled up on the floor next to my bed, Max stretched out beside her. Sorry, sir, she said, scrambling to her feet. Max had nightmares. I didn't want him to wake you. I offered her the bed. She shook her head. The floor is fine. I'm used to it. But she wasn't sleeping on the floor. I found pillows and blankets arranged neatly in the spare room. Her clothes hanging in the closet. Toiletries lined up on the bathroom counter. When did this happen? When did she move in completely? Melvy, I said one morning over coffee, are you living here now? She looked genuinely confused. Living here, sir. I just sleep here sometimes. When Max needs me. As if on cue, Max whined and pressed against her legs. See? He's very sensitive. The money requests became routine. My aunt needs surgery. My nephew's school fees. My friend's motorcycle broke down. Always someone else's emergency. Always urgent. Always just enough to make me feel generous without breaking my budget. Well, not breaking it immediately. I started transferring money directly to her bank account. Easier that way. Less awkward than handing over cash. You're an angel, sir, she'd say each time. God will bless you for your kindness. I told myself I was helping. This young woman had been dealt a tough hand in life. Lost her mother, raised by an abusive sister, surrounded by dangerous men. If I could make her feel safe, if I could ease her burdens, wasn't that worth something? You have such a good heart, she said one night, sitting on the edge of my bed while Max slept between us. I've never met a man like you. Her hand touched mine, briefly. Promise me something, sir, I waited. If you ever leave the Philippines, don't take Max away from me. I love him too much. The request should have seemed strange. Why would I leave without my dog? But the way she said it, the vulnerability in her voice, made it sound reasonable. Like she was protecting herself from future heartbreak. I'm not going anywhere, I assured her. This is my home now, and Max loves it here too. She smiled, but there was something else in her expression. Relief? Victory? I couldn't tell. My sister called. She announced one morning. She wants me to come home. Says I'm wasting my time here. I felt a stab of panic. Are you going to go? She shook her head firmly. No, sir, my home is here now, with you and Max. She knelt down and hugged my dog. Isn't that right, baby? We're a family now. Max licked her face enthusiastically. I felt that warm feeling again. Family. When was the last time I'd been part of a real family? But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd hear her talking on the phone. Quick, hushed conversations in Visayan that I couldn't understand. When I'd ask about them the next morning, she'd wave it off. Just my friend, she worries about me. Or, my cousin, family drama. Always a simple explanation. Always delivered with that same gentle smile. I stopped asking after a while. One evening, she brought up the topic of my will. We were watching a news story about an expat who died suddenly. Very sad, she said, shaking her head. His family in America got everything. His Filipino girlfriend got nothing, even though she took care of him for 3 years. She looked at Max, who was sprawled across both our laps. What would happen to Max if something happened to you, sir? It was a fair question, a practical question, but something about the timing felt off. I haven't really thought about it, I admitted. She nodded slowly. Maybe you should, sir. Max would be heartbroken if he had to leave the Philippines. This is his home. I'm his family. The way she paused before saying family made it sound like she was choosing her words carefully. Maybe you could leave instructions, that he should stay with someone who loves him, someone like her, she meant, someone who'd already proven she could take care of him. That makes sense, I said, and it did make sense. Who else would I trust with Max? Some relative back in Oregon who'd never met him? A stranger from an animal rescue? At least Melvy knew his habits, his favorite foods, his anxieties. At least she loved him. I'll talk to a lawyer, I promised. Her face lit up. Really, sir? You'd do that? She hugged Max tighter. Did you hear that, baby? Daddy's going to make sure you're always safe. I should have wondered why she was so interested in my death. Should have questioned the timing of these conversations. Should have noticed how she always brought up Max's well-being right after asking for money. But I didn't want to see the pattern. I wanted to believe in the family we'd built. I wanted to believe someone finally needed me as much as I needed them. Looking back, I realized she was building something. Not a relationship, not a family. A case, evidence that she was indispensable, that Max belonged to her as much as me, that removing her from our lives would be cruel, unthinkable. She was laying groundwork for a future I couldn't imagine yet, a future where I'd have to choose between my dog and my sanity. But I didn't see any of that then. I just saw a young woman who loved my dog almost as much as I did. I saw late nights spent worrying over Max's health, early mornings dedicated to his care, gentle hands that never lost patience with his quirks and fears. I saw devotion. I saw love. I saw everything I wanted to see and nothing I needed to see. The call came during lunch. I was watching Melvy feed Max scraps of chicken adobo from her plate when my phone rang. St. Paul Hospital. My stomach dropped. You don't get calls from hospitals for good news, Mr. Tate? The voice was crisp, professional. We have your blood pressure results from yesterday's test. I'd forgotten about the test. Just routine blood work, the doctor had said. Nothing to worry about. Your systolic reading is 2 to 10 over 130, she continued. We need you to come in immediately for observation. Immediately. I looked at Max, who was still begging for chicken. Like, right now? The nurse's tone shifted slightly. More urgent. Mr. Tate, these numbers put you at severe risk for stroke or heart attack. We can't wait until tomorrow. Melvy was watching me now, chicken forgotten. What's wrong, sir? She whispered. I covered the phone. Hospital. Blood pressure. Her eyes widened with worry. Real worry, I thought. At least it looked real. I understand, I told the nurse. But I have a dog. I can't just leave him alone. There was a pause. Is there someone who can watch him? I looked at Melvy. She was already nodding, reaching for Max's collar. Yes, I said, someone who knows him well. The nurse sounded relieved. Good. How soon can you be here? I checked my watch. 2:30. 30 minutes? Another pause. We'll be waiting for you, Mr. Tate. Don't drive yourself. Take a taxi, or have someone bring you. I hung up and felt the room spin slightly. 210 over 130. Those were dangerous numbers. Life-threatening numbers. Sir, sit down, Melvy said, guiding me to a chair. You look pale. Max sensed something was wrong and pressed against my legs, whining softly. It's okay, buddy, I whispered, scratching his ears. Everything's okay. But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this felt okay. I have to go to the hospital, I told Melvy. They want to keep me overnight. Maybe longer. She knelt beside my chair and took my hands in hers. Don't worry about Max, sir. I'll take care of everything. He'll be safe with me. Her hands were warm, steady. Mine were shaking. You sure? He gets anxious when I'm not here. She smiled that gentle smile. He has me now. He'll be fine. You just focus on getting better. I started making a mental list. Max's food was in the kitchen cupboard. His medication for his arthritis was on the counter. His leash hung by the door. The vet's number is on the refrigerator, I began, but Melvy interrupted. Sir, I know all of this. I know his schedule, his medicines, his favorite sleeping spots. Stop worrying. She was right. Of all the people in the world, she knew Max's routine better than anyone, even better than me, in some ways. I need to pack a bag, I said, trying to stand. The room tilted again. I'll pack for you, Melvy said firmly. Just rest. She was already moving, grabbing a small suitcase from the closet. Clean underwear, pajamas, toiletries, my blood pressure medication. She thought of everything. Even included my reading glasses and the mystery novel I'd been working through. You're good at this, I said, watching her work. Too much practice, she replied quietly. The taxi honked outside. Max's ears perked up at the sound. He knew that honk meant I was leaving, usually just for groceries or coffee with other expats. But something about my demeanor must have told him this was different. He started pacing, whimpering. 1. It's okay, baby, Melvy said, scooping him up despite his 40-pound weight. Mama's staying with you. Mama. She'd never called herself that before, not out loud, not in front of me. I'll call you tonight, I promised, kissing Max's head. He licked my face frantically, like he was trying to memorize my scent. Be good for Melvy. I handed her my house keys. All of them, front door, back door, the spare bedroom I'd been letting her use. Are you sure, sir? She asked, but she was already pocketing them. You trust me with everything? The question seemed loaded somehow. Heavier than it should have been. Of course I trust you, I said, with my life. As the taxi pulled away, I turned, back to wave. Melvy was standing in the doorway, holding Max like a baby. He was still looking for me, head turning left and right. She raised his paw and made him wave goodbye. It should have been cute. Should have made me smile. Instead, it felt like watching my whole world disappear behind a closing door. At the hospital, they hooked me up to monitors and pumped me full of blood pressure medication. The doctor was young, serious, Filipino-Australian, trained in Melbourne. Mr. Tate, you're lucky, he said, reviewing my chart. Another few points and you would have been looking at emergency surgery. The word surgery made my chest tight. How long do I need to stay? He checked his watch. 24 hours minimum. We need to stabilize these numbers and make sure you're not having any cardiac episodes. I called Melvy around 8 that evening. Max was barking in the background. He's been crying for you, sir, she said. But he ate his dinner. We took a long walk. He's okay. The barking sounded urgent, desperate. Different from his usual attention-seeking barks. Can you put the phone near him? I asked. Maybe hearing my voice will help. I heard rustling, then Melvy's voice getting distant. Max, Daddy's on the phone. Say hello. Hey, buddy. I said loudly. I'm okay. I'll be home soon. The barking stopped immediately. Then started again, more frantic than before. He knows it's you, Melvy said, coming back to the phone. But he doesn't understand where you are. My heart ached. 7 years old. Set in his routines. Probably confused and scared. Just keep talking to him, I said. Let him know he's not alone. She promised she would. I didn't sleep well that night. The hospital bed was uncomfortable, the sounds unfamiliar, but mostly I kept thinking about Max. Was he sleeping on my bed, looking for me? Was he pacing by the front door, waiting for the sound of my key? I'd never spent a night away from him, not since I'd adopted him as a puppy back in Oregon. He'd been with me through the divorce, the move to the Philippines, the adjustment to retirement. We were a team. A unit. I wasn't just his owner, I was his person. The next morning, my blood pressure had dropped to manageable levels. The doctor seemed satisfied. You can go home this afternoon, he said. But I want to see you twice a week for the next month. And no stress, Mr. Tate. Whatever's been worrying you, let it go. No stress. Easy for him to say. I was worried about everything. My health, my future, my dog, my growing dependence on a woman I'd known for less than 3 months. I called a tricycle to take me home. Cheaper than a taxi, and the driver was chatty, distracted me from my anxiety. You look worried, sir, he said, navigating the busy streets. Everything okay? I told him about the hospital stay, about leaving my dog for the first time. Ah, dogs are like children, he said, nodding knowingly. They don't understand when Papa goes away, but they forgive quick. I hoped he was right. We turned onto my street, and I felt that familiar relief of coming home. Almost there. Almost back to Max. Almost back to normal. But as we pulled up to my house, something felt wrong. Too quiet. No barking. No excited whining. No sound at all. "This your place, sir?" the driver asked. I nodded, paying him quickly. "Max," I called out before I even reached the door. "Max, I'm home." Nothing. The door was locked. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking again, but for a different reason now. "Melvy?" I called, pushing the door open. "Max?" The house felt empty, not just quiet. Empty. Like when you walk into a hotel room that hasn't been occupied in weeks. No dog toys scattered on the floor. No water bowl by the kitchen counter. No leash hanging by the door. No Max. The silence hit me like a physical blow. I stood in my own doorway, listening for any sound that would tell me I was wrong. That Max was just sleeping. That Melvy was just in the shower. That everything was normal. But the house felt hollow. Dead. Like the life had been sucked out of it while I was gone. "Max?" I called again, my voice echoing off empty walls. Nothing. I walked through each room methodically, like a detective searching a crime scene. The living room where Max usually napped on his favorite cushion. Empty. The kitchen where his food and water bowls should be. Gone. My bedroom where he slept every night at the foot of the bed. No sign he'd ever been there. Even his smell was fading. That warm, slightly musty dog smell that I'd grown so used to. It was disappearing like he'd never existed at all. The spare room where Melvy had been staying looked untouched. Bed made perfectly. No clothes in the closet. No toiletries on the dresser. Like she'd packed up and left in a hurry, or like she'd never really lived there at all. Maybe she'd just been visiting this whole time. Maybe I'd imagined the whole domestic situation. Maybe I'd been living in a fantasy for 3 months while reality waited to ambush me. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. It rang 4 times before she answered. "Hello, sir," she said, but her voice sounded different, distant, formal, like we were strangers again. "Melvy, where are you?" I tried to keep the panic out of my voice. "Where's Max?" There was a pause. Traffic sounds in the background. Voices. She was somewhere public. Somewhere busy. "I went to the market, sir. Max is sleeping." "Sleeping where?" The question came out sharper than I intended. Another pause. Longer this time. "At home, sir. In his favorite spot." But I was standing in his favorite spot. The living room cushion where he spent most afternoons. It was empty. Cold. Like no one had touched it in hours. "Melvy, I'm home. Max isn't here." Silence on the other end. Then, "Oh, you're home early, sir. I'll be back soon." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, trying to process what had just happened. She'd hung up on me. After 3 months of constant communication, endless text messages, phone calls that lasted hours, she'd just hung up, like I was bothering her, like I was interrupting something important. More important than explaining where my dog was. I tried calling again, straight to voicemail. Then again, same thing. Either her phone was off, or she was deliberately ignoring me. Both possibilities terrified me. I sent a text message. "Where is Max? Please answer me." No reply. Another text. "I'm worried. Call me back." Nothing. A third. "Melvy, this isn't funny. I need to know where my dog is." The messages showed as delivered but not read. 2 hours passed. The longest 2 hours of my life. I paced through the empty house, checking the same rooms over and over, hoping Max would somehow materialize. That I'd missed something. That he was hiding under a bed or behind a couch, playing some elaborate game of hide and seek. But dogs don't play hide and seek. Dogs come running when their owner calls. Dogs don't just vanish. I went outside and walked the neighborhood, calling Max's name. Other people stared. An old American man stumbling around the streets, shouting for his dog. Probably looked like I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. "Max, Max." My voice was getting hoarse. A few neighbors came out of their houses. "Sir, you okay?" asked the lady who lived next door. I'd spoken to her maybe twice in 6 months. "My dog is missing," I told her, trying to sound calm. "Brown and white. Mixed breed. About 40 pounds. She nodded sympathetically. I saw him yesterday. With the young lady. They went for a walk in the morning. Yesterday. Before I came home. Before Melvy claimed he was sleeping. Did you see them come back? She thought for a moment. I don't think so, sir, but I was busy, cooking, maybe I missed them. I thanked her and continued walking. Past the convenience store where I bought Max's treats. Past the small park where Melvy used to take him to play. Past the veterinary clinic where we'd gone for his checkups. None of the familiar places felt familiar anymore. They felt like locations in a movie I'd watched once. Recognizable but unreal. Like I was walking through someone else's life. A group of kids were playing basketball at the barangay court. I approached them carefully. Kids notice everything adults miss. Excuse me, I called out. They stopped playing and gathered around me. Curious but polite. Did any of you see a brown and white dog today? With a young lady? They looked at each other, conferring in rapid Visayan. Then the oldest boy, maybe 12, stepped forward. The brown one with the floppy ear? He asked. I nodded eagerly. Yes, that's him. His name is Max. The boy's expression changed. Became uncomfortable. Sir, the girl sold him to Kuya Jun, the mechanic near the highway. The words hit me like a truck. Sold. Not lost, not stolen, sold. Like a piece of furniture, like something disposable. Are you sure? My voice cracked on the question. The boy nodded gravely. Yesterday afternoon, I saw them talking. Money changed hands. Then Kuya Jun took the dog to his shop. The other kids were watching me with a mixture of curiosity and pity. They understood what had happened before I did. A foreign man had been taken advantage of. His dog had been sold for quick cash. It was probably not the first time they'd witnessed such a thing. I stumbled back toward my house, the kids' words echoing in my head. Sold him to the mechanic. Yesterday afternoon. While I was in the hospital, worried about my blood pressure, worried about leaving Max alone, Melvy had been negotiating his sale price. How much was he worth? How much was my heart worth? How much was 7 years of loyalty worth? My phone buzzed. A text from Melvy. Sorry, sir. Battery died. On my way home now. I stared at the message, trying to understand how she could write those words. Home. She was calling my house her home, using the present tense like nothing had changed, like Max would still be waiting for us when she arrived. Like we were still a family. I didn't reply. What could I say? I know what you did. Where's my dog? How could you? All the questions felt inadequate. Too small for the size of this betrayal. Instead, I sat on my front steps and waited. Waited for her to come back and explain. Waited for her to tell me it was all a misunderstanding. Waited for her to bring Max home with that playful grin, like it had all been some elaborate prank. But I knew she wouldn't be bringing Max home. The kid at the basketball court had no reason to lie. Kuya Jun the mechanic had my dog. Had paid money for him. Money that was probably already spent. And Melvy was going to have to look me in the eye and explain how Max had become a commodity, how love had become commerce, how family had become business. The sun was setting when I saw her tricycle turn onto our street. She was alone. No Max, panting beside her, no leash in her hand, no guilty expression on her face. Just Melvy, carrying a bag of groceries, walking toward my front door like this was any other evening, like nothing had changed. Like my world hadn't just collapsed while she was at the market. Good evening, sir, she said, climbing the steps where I sat. How was the hospital? She had pancit. Pork and vegetables mixed with noodles, still warm from whatever carinderia she'd bought it from. The smell that used to make me hungry now made my stomach turn. She set the plastic container on the kitchen table like this was a normal evening. Like we were about to have a normal dinner. Like my dog wasn't missing and she wasn't pretending everything was fine. I thought you might be hungry when you got home, she said, opening the container. Steam rose from the noodles. Hospital food is terrible, right? Her voice was cheerful. Too cheerful. The kind of forced brightness people use when they're trying to convince themselves that everything's okay. I got extra pork, the way you like it. She was, still talking, filling the silence with chatter about the market, the weather, anything except the obvious question hanging between us. Melvy. My voice came out quieter than I intended. She looked up from the food, eyebrows raised in polite attention, like a waitress taking an order. Where's Max? 3 simple words. The most important 3 words I'd ever spoken. She blinked slowly, as if she didn't understand the question, as if I'd asked her something in a foreign language. Max? She repeated, like she was trying to remember who that was. He's... She paused, looking around the kitchen as if he might materialize from behind the refrigerator. He's resting, sir. All the excitement from yesterday tired him out. Excitement. She called my hospitalization excitement, like it had been a fun adventure instead of a medical emergency. I stood up from the table. I've been through the whole house, Melvy. Max isn't here. She kept stirring the pancit, not meeting my eyes. Maybe he's hiding. You know how he gets when he's upset. But dogs don't hide when their owners come home. Dogs run to greet them. Dogs bark and jump and cover them with kisses. Dogs don't vanish into thin air. Where's Max? I asked again, louder this time. The spoon in her hand stopped moving. The cheerful mask slipped just slightly. Sir, you're scaring me. Why are you shouting? But I wasn't shouting, not yet, though I could feel it building in my chest. The need to yell, to demand answers, to make her tell me the truth. A kid down the street told me something, I said, watching her face carefully. About Max, about yesterday. Her grip tightened on the spoon. Kids say many things, sir. They like to make stories. Stories. She was calling it stories. Like the truth was just neighborhood gossip. Like facts were optional. He said you sold Max to the mechanic. The words fell between us like stones. Heavy. Unavoidable. She stopped stirring completely now. Set the spoon down on the counter with deliberate care. When she looked up at me, her expression had changed. The fake sweetness was gone. What remained was something colder, harder. The dog was barking non-stop. She said matter-of-factly, all night, all morning. The neighbors were complaining. Mrs. Santos threatened to call the barangay captain. Her voice was different now. Practical, businesslike, like she was explaining why she'd thrown away old newspapers. I had to do something, sir. Had to do something. Like selling Max was the only option. Like there weren't a dozen other solutions. Like she couldn't have called me at the hospital. Like she couldn't have waited 12 hours for me to come home. You had to sell him? I asked, still trying to make sense of this. That was your solution? She shrugged. Actually shrugged. Like it was obvious. Like any reasonable person would have done the same thing. He was stressed, sir. Too much responsibility. And the neighbors. She trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. As if neighbor complaints were more important than 7 years of companionship. He wasn't a thing, Melvy. My voice was getting louder now. I couldn't help it. He was family. He was. I searched for words that could explain what Max meant to me. The mornings waking up to his wet nose against my cheek. The evenings, with his warm weight across my feet. The complete, unconditional love that had followed me halfway around the world. He was everything. She rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes. Like my grief was tedious. Like my shock was an overreaction. Then you shouldn't have left him, sir. The accusation hit me like a slap. Like going to the hospital had been a choice. Like nearly dying from high blood pressure had been my fault. I was sick, Melvy. I could have had a stroke. But you didn't. She replied simply. You're fine now. Fine. She thought I was fine. Standing in my empty house, learning that my dog had been sold like scrap metal, and she thought I was fine. Max isn't fine, I said. Max is gone. Max is with a stranger who bought him like a used motorcycle. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked slightly uncomfortable. He's happy, sir. The mechanic is kind. He has other dogs. Max will make friends. Friends. Like Max was starting kindergarten, instead of being abandoned by the only family he'd ever known. Like dogs don't form deep, lasting bonds with their humans. Like 7 years meant nothing. How much? The question came out like a whisper. She pretended not to hear me. How much did you sell him for? She fidgeted with her phone, checking messages that probably weren't there. It doesn't matter, sir. But it did matter. It mattered more than anything. The price would tell me how little my dog's life was worth to her. How little our family meant. Tell me. My voice was steady now, dead calm. The kind of calm that comes after the storm has already destroyed everything. She sighed like I was being unreasonable. Like I was making a big deal out of nothing. 3,000 pesos. 3,000. About $70 American. Less than I'd given her last week for her sick brother. Less than a nice dinner in Oregon. Less than Max's monthly food budget. $70. I said it out loud, needing to hear how it sounded. You sold 7 years of loyalty for $70. She shrugged again, that infuriating gesture that said nothing mattered. Nothing was important. Nothing was worth getting upset about. Dogs are not expensive here, sir. That's good price. Good price. Like we were discussing the cost of rice or gasoline. Like Max was a commodity with market value. Like love could be quantified and sold by the pound. Where's the money? I asked. She looked confused by the question. What money, sir? But she knew exactly what money. The 3,000 pesos you got from my dog. Where is it? She gestured vaguely toward her purse. I have some. I spent some. Spent some. Of course she had. The money from selling my dog was probably already gone, converted into clothes or phone credits or whatever else she needed. Max's life had been transformed into consumption. His loyalty had been liquidated. I want it back, I said. All of it. And I want to know where the mechanic lives. Her expression hardened. Sir, what's done is done. The dog is happy. You should be happy too. Happy. She wanted me to be happy that my best friend had been sold like a piece of furniture. Happy that the creature who'd loved me unconditionally was now living with strangers. His name is Max, I said firmly. Not the dog, Max, and he's not happy. He's confused. He's scared. He's wondering why I abandoned him. The thought broke something inside me. Max waiting by a strange door, listening for my footsteps. Max refusing to eat because nothing smelled like home. Max growing old in a place where no one knew his favorite spots to be scratched. You're being emotional, sir, Melvy said dismissively. It's just an animal. Just an animal. After 3 months of calling him our baby, of kissing his head goodnight, of pretending to love him almost as much as I did, now he was just an animal. The mask was completely off now. The gentle caregiver who'd won my trust was gone. What remained was a stranger who saw everything as transactional. Get out. The words surprised me as much as they surprised her. What, sir? She looked genuinely shocked. Like she'd expected me to accept her explanation and move on. Like she'd expected us to eat pancit and pretend nothing had changed. Get out of my house. Now. She stood up slowly, uncertainty flickering across her face. Sir, you're upset. Let me explain more. But there was nothing to explain. She'd sold my dog while I was in the hospital. She'd taken the one thing that mattered most to me and turned it into cash. No explanation could fix that. No words could undo that betrayal. There's nothing to explain, Melvy. You sold Max, you took my house, keys, and sold my dog. She gathered her purse, moving toward the door but hesitating. Where will I stay tonight, sir? The question was unbelievable. After everything she'd done, she still expected me to take care of her. Still expected me to provide for her needs. I don't care where you stay, I said, following her to the door. Just not here. Never here again. She turned to face me one last time, and for a moment I saw something that might have been regret, or maybe just frustration that her comfortable situation was ending. Sir, I'm sorry you're upset, but you'll understand later. This is better for everyone. Better for everyone. The final insult. She actually believed she'd done me a favor. That removing the source of my greatest joy was somehow beneficial. That I should thank her for destroying the one relationship in my life that had never disappointed me. I closed the door behind her and turned the deadbolt. The sound echoed through the empty house. No paws clicking on the tile floor. No tail thumping against furniture. No warm presence settling down beside me. Just silence. The terrible, complete silence of being truly alone. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every sound made me think Max was coming home. Every creak of the house settling. Every rustle of wind through the windows. Every distant dog bark from the neighborhood. I'd get up and check the front door, hoping to find him scratching to get in. But the door stayed closed. The house stayed empty. Max stayed gone. By sunrise, I'd made my decision. I was getting my dog back. Whatever it cost, whatever it took, I was bringing him home. The kid at the basketball court had said Kuya June the mechanic, near the highway. How many mechanics could there be on a 2-kilometer stretch of road? I'd find him. I'd explain the situation. I'd pay whatever he wanted. I started walking as soon as it was light enough to see clearly. Past the convenience store, past the school, past the church, where Sunday Mass was already letting out. The highway was busier than I'd expected. Jeepneys and motorcycles weaving through traffic, vendors selling coffee and cigarettes from cardboard boxes. The smell of diesel exhaust and cooking meat mixed with the humid morning air. The first shop I found was mostly motorcycles. Young guys in greasy coveralls, loud music playing from a radio. I approached the owner, a man about my age, with kind eyes and oil-stained hands. "Excuse me, do you know Kuya Jun, the mechanic who bought a dog yesterday?" He looked confused. "Dogs, sir? We don't buy dogs. Only motorcycles." I thanked him and moved on. The second shop was larger. Cars and trucks parked in various stages of repair. A sign in English and Tagalog advertised brake service and engine rebuilding. I found a woman in the office, probably the owner's wife. "I'm looking for Jun," I told her. "He bought my dog yesterday. I want to buy him back." She studied my face carefully. "You're the American? The one with the brown dog?" My heart jumped. "Yes. Do you know where Jun's shop is?" She pointed down the highway. 2 blocks, yellow building. "But sir," she paused, like she was deciding whether to say something. "The dog is very sad, crying all night. Jun's other dogs don't like him, crying all night." The image of Max alone and frightened made my chest tight. "Thank you," I managed to say. "Thank you for telling me." I found the yellow building easily. It was smaller than the other shops, wedged between a tire repair place and a convenience store. Hand-painted sign, "Jun's Auto Repair, all vehicles welcome." The sound hit me before I saw anything. Barking. Multiple dogs, but one voice I recognized immediately. Max. Higher pitched than usual, more desperate. The sound of a dog in distress. I pushed through the gate into a small courtyard. 3 local dogs lounged in the shade, unbothered by the heat. But in the corner, tied to a metal post with a short rope, was Max. He looked smaller than I. Remembered. Thinner. His coat was dusty and matted. When he saw me, his barking changed to something between joy and panic. Like he couldn't believe I was real. "Max," I called softly. He lunged toward me as far as the rope allowed, whimpering and spinning in circles. I started toward him, but a voice stopped me. "Sir, you are the owner?" I turned to see a man emerging from the garage. Short, muscular, maybe 40 years old. Grease on his hands but a gentle face. This had to be Jun. "Yes," I said. "That's my dog." "Max." Jun nodded slowly, looking between me and Max, who was still straining against his rope. "The girl said you were sick, in hospital. Said you couldn't take care of him." His English was careful but clear. "I paid good money, 3,000. 3,000 pesos that I would gladly triple to get Max back." "She had no right to sell him," I explained. "I was only gone one night. I never said she could." I gestured helplessly at Max, who was now whining continuously. A high, keening sound that cut through me like glass. "He's been crying since yesterday," Jun said. "My dogs don't like him. He won't eat, just cries for his owner." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been lying in a hospital bed worrying about blood pressure, Max had been here, tied up, abandoned by the only family he'd known, surrounded by strange dogs in a strange place, wondering why I'd left him, wondering what he'd done wrong. "I want to buy him back," I said. Jun studied my face for a long moment. "You have money?" I pulled out my wallet, checking the bills inside. 4,000 pesos, more than enough. "How much do you want?" Jun looked at Max, who had stopped barking but was still whimpering softly. "He's good dog, smart dog, but," he shrugged, "he belongs with you." "I can see. 5,000. I offered, pulling out all my cash. "Please." Jun waved the money away. 3,000. Same I paid. Fair is fair. But I insisted on giving him 5. He'd been kind to Max. Even if Max couldn't appreciate it, he'd recognized that something was wrong. He'd been willing to let him go even though he'd lose money on the deal. "Can I?" I gestured toward Max. Jun nodded and untied the rope. Max bounded toward me, nearly knocking me over. 40 pounds of desperate relief, licking my face and hands and arms. His whole body was shaking. Or maybe I was shaking. It was hard to tell where his trembling ended and mine began. "Easy, buddy," I whispered, trying to calm him down. "I'm here. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But he wouldn't calm down. Kept jumping and spinning and making those desperate whimpering sounds, like he thought I might disappear again if he wasn't vigilant, like he was afraid this was a dream. He missed you very much, Jun said quietly. All night, all morning, just crying. My wife, she felt bad for him. I looked up, noticing a woman watching from the doorway of the shop. She smiled sadly and waved. Thank you, I called to her. Thank you for being kind to him. She nodded and disappeared back inside. Come on, Max, I said, standing up. Let's go home. But when I started walking toward the gate, Max hesitated. He looked back at Jun, then at me, like he wasn't sure this was real. Like he was afraid to trust that I was really taking him home. It's okay, I assured him. We're going home. Together. The walk back felt longer than the walk there. Max stayed pressed against my legs, looking up at me every few seconds to make sure I was still there. When other dogs barked from behind fences, he flinched. When motorcycles roared past, he cowered. The confident, friendly dog I'd known for 7 years was gone. What remained was anxious and traumatized. Broken. I'm sorry. I kept saying as we walked. I'm so sorry, buddy. I should have taken you to the hospital with me. I should have known better. But sorry felt inadequate. Sorry wouldn't erase the night he'd spent tied to a post in a stranger's yard. Sorry wouldn't restore the trust that had been damaged. When we finally reached my street, Max's tail started wagging for the first time since I'd found him. Not the exuberant full-body wag of his younger days, but a tentative acknowledgement that he recognized where we were, that we were really going home, that I hadn't abandoned him after all. But as we climbed the front steps, I realized something had changed between us. Max was happy to be home, yes. Relieved to be with me, yes. But there was a wariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A hesitation, like part of him was still waiting for the next betrayal, still wondering when I might leave him again. I opened the front door, and Max rushed inside, sniffing everything frantically, checking corners, reclaiming territory, making sure nothing else had changed while he was gone. When he finally settled on his favorite cushion in the living room, he kept his eyes on me. Not the trusting, sleepy gaze of before, but alert vigilance. Like he was standing guard against future abandonments. I sat down on the floor beside him and put my hand on his head. His tail thumped once, twice, then stopped. I know I hurt you, I said aloud. I know you don't understand why I left you with her. I don't understand it either. Max rested his chin on my knee but kept watching me, waiting, protecting himself from hoping too much. Maybe dogs forgive, but they also remember. Maybe love isn't enough to erase trauma. Maybe some betrayals leave permanent scars, even when they're not your fault. As I sat there with my damaged dog in my empty house, I realized that getting Max back was only the beginning. Learning to trust each other again would be the real work. Max and I spent the next 3 days relearning how to be together. He followed me from room to room, never letting me out of his sight. When I showered, he waited outside the bathroom door. When I cooked, he pressed against my legs in the kitchen. When I sat down to read, he climbed onto the couch, and beside me, something he'd never done before, like he was afraid that if he wasn't touching me, I might vanish again. The nightmares started on the second night. I'd wake to the sound of Max whimpering, his legs moving like he was running in his sleep. When I'd reach over to comfort him, he'd jolt awake with a startled yelp, wide eyes searching the darkness until he found me. Then he'd lick my hand once and settle back down, but sleep wouldn't come easily for either of us. I kept expecting Melvy to call, to text, to show up at my door with some explanation or apology, something that might make sense of what she'd done. But my phone stayed silent, no messages asking if I was okay. No calls wondering if I'd found Max, nothing. Like the 3 months we'd spent building a life together had never happened. Like Max and I were just another transaction that had ended. On the 3rd day, I found her note. I'd been avoiding the kitchen, ordering food delivery instead of cooking. Too many memories of her standing at the stove, humming while she prepared our meals. But I ran out of bottled water and had to get some from the refrigerator. That's when I saw it, a small piece of paper stuck under a magnet shaped like a jeepney. Her handwriting in careful English letters. Sir, you are too emotional about this. He is just a dog. I am sorry you are upset, but this is better for everyone. You will understand later. Take care of yourself. M. Just a dog. After 3 months of calling him our baby, after kissing his head goodnight, after claiming to love him almost as much as I did, he was just a dog. The casual cruelty of those 4 words hit me harder than anything else she'd said. Not even, "I'm sorry I sold your dog," or "I made a mistake." Just dismissal. Like my grief was unreasonable, like my attachment was pathetic. I read the note 3 times, looking for some hint of remorse, some acknowledgement that she'd hurt me, but there was nothing. No apology for selling Max. No regret for breaking my trust. No recognition that she'd destroyed something precious. Just annoyance that I was too emotional about losing the most important relationship in my life. Better for everyone. The phrase echoed in my head as I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. Better for her, maybe. 3,000 pesos richer for an hour's work. But better for Max. He was still having nightmares. Still flinching at unexpected sounds. Still following me around like he was afraid I might leave again. Better for me. I was sleeping on the couch because my bed felt too big and empty without his familiar weight at my feet. I pulled up my banking app and started scrolling through months of transfers. Melvy's name appeared over and over, small amounts at first, then larger ones. Her sick brother who needed medicine, her sister who couldn't make rent, her phone that broke, her friend whose motorcycle needed repair. Always someone else's emergency, always urgent, always just enough to make me feel generous without breaking my budget. 2,000 here. 5,000 there. Sometimes 10,000 for bigger emergencies. I added it up twice, not believing the total the first time. $14,000. Over 11 months, I'd sent her more than I'd spent on rent back in Oregon, more than I'd spent on Max's food, toys, and veterinary care combined. She'd been systematically draining my retirement savings while pretending to care about us. The money didn't matter anymore. Not really. I had enough saved to live comfortably for years. But the pattern mattered. The methodical way she'd identified my weaknesses and exploited them. My loneliness, my need to feel useful, my love for Max. She'd turned all of it into leverage. Used my emotions as an ATM. I thought about texting her, demanding an explanation, asking why she'd done this to us. But what was the point? She'd already told me everything I needed to know. We were too emotional. Max was just a dog. She was sorry we were, upset but not sorry for what she'd done. In her mind, she'd committed no crime. Just seized an opportunity. Max wandered into the kitchen and sat beside my chair, resting his chin on my knee. His favorite spot for the past 3 days. "What do you think, buddy?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. "Should I try to get an apology?" His tail wagged weakly. Like he was trying to comfort me but didn't have the energy for real enthusiasm yet. "You're right," I said. "She's not sorry, and we don't need her to be." But that wasn't quite true. Part of me desperately wanted her to acknowledge what she'd done. To admit that selling Max was wrong. To show some trace of the gentle, caring woman I'd fallen in love with. To prove that our relationship had meant something to her, even if it hadn't meant enough. I checked my phone one more time, hoping for a message that would never come. Then I deleted her number, deleted our text conversations, deleted the photos I'd taken of her playing with Max in the yard. Erased the digital evidence of our life together. But I couldn't delete the memories. Couldn't unsee her face when she'd first met Max. Couldn't unhear her voice calling him our baby. Maybe that was the cruelest part. Not just that she'd betrayed us, but that the betrayal revealed how little any of it had meant to her. The tender moments I'd treasured were just performances. The family I'd thought we'd built was just an elaborate con. The love I'd felt was real, but it had been entirely one-sided. "Come on," I said to Max, standing up from the table. "Let's go for a walk." He looked up at me uncertainly. We hadn't left the house together since I'd brought him back from June's shop. "Just around the block," I promised. "You and me, like old times." We made it halfway down the street before Max started pulling back toward the house. Not the confident, exploring dog he used to be, but anxious and clingy. "It's okay," I assured him, kneeling down to his level. "I'm not going anywhere without you. Ever again." He licked my face once, then looked toward home. His trust was broken, just like mine. It would take time to heal. That night, I moved my mattress to the living room floor. If Max was going to sleep pressed against me for comfort, the least I could do was make us both comfortable. He settled down immediately, his back against my chest, finally relaxing completely for the first time since I'd brought him home. "We're going to be okay," I whispered into his fur. "Different than before, but okay." He sighed deeply and closed his eyes. For the first time in days, neither of us had nightmares. We slept like exhausted soldiers who'd finally reached safety. Wounded but alive. Betrayed but not broken. Together again, even if nothing else would ever be quite the same. It's been a year now. Max is 8 years old, moving a little slower than he used to. His muzzle is grayer, his afternoon naps are longer, but every morning, he still comes to my bedside and puts his wet nose against my cheek, his way of saying good morning, his way of making sure I'm still here. We've settled into new routines. Shorter walks, but more of them. He doesn't range as far from my side as he used to. Doesn't trust that I'll still be there when he comes back from investigating an interesting smell, but his tail wags more readily now. The wariness in his eyes has softened. Time heals, even when trust doesn't fully return. I still live in Dumaguete, still shop at the same markets, eat at the same restaurants, walk the same streets. Sometimes I see her, Melvy. Usually with another foreign man. Always someone older, always someone who looks a little lonely. The pattern repeats itself. She smiles the same gentle smile, touches their arm with the same practiced affection. I wonder if she tells them about her sick brother. I wonder if she calls their pets our baby. The first time I saw her, my stomach dropped. Max noticed my tension immediately, pressing against my legs, the way he does when he senses danger. She was sitting in a coffee shop with a man who looked to be in his 70s, Australian, from his accent. She was listening to him talk with that same rapt attention she used to give me, like he was the most fascinating person in the world. She saw me through the window and our eyes met for just a moment. I expected her to look away, embarrassed or ashamed. Instead, she smiled and waved like we were old friends who'd simply lost touch. Like she'd done nothing wrong. Like Max was just an unfortunate misunderstanding that we'd moved past. I didn't wave back. "Come on, buddy," I said to Max, who was staring at her with what looked like recognition. "Let's go home." He followed me without protest, but I noticed him looking back over his shoulder once. Just checking to make sure she wasn't following us. Even a year later he remembers. "I don't date anymore. Don't send money to women who claim to need help. Don't trust easily or love carelessly. The other expats think I'm becoming antisocial. You need to get back out there, Harlan," they say. Not all Filipino women are the same. They're probably right. But I'm not willing to take that chance again. I'm not willing to risk Max's well-being for the possibility of companionship. Besides, I'm not really alone. Max and I have each other. We watch movies together in the evening, him stretched across my lap while I scratch his ears. We sit on the porch in the morning, drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up. Well, I drink coffee. He just enjoys the company and the morning breeze. Simple pleasures that don't require trust or vulnerability or the risk of betrayal. The money I used to send to Melvy now goes to the local animal shelter. Monthly donations for dog food and veterinary care. I volunteer there sometimes, walking dogs that remind me of Max in his younger days. Eager, trusting creatures who haven't learned yet that humans can be cruel. I hope they never have to learn. Last month, I updated my will. Max is getting older, and I need to plan for the possibility that I might outlive him, or he might outlive me. If something happens to me, he goes to my nephew in Oregon, a good kid who grew up with dogs and understands what loyalty means. If something happens to Max first, I'm donating everything to animal welfare organizations. No family members who barely knew me. No strangers who might see dollar signs instead of a lifetime of work. I think about Melvy sometimes, but not with anger anymore. Mostly with sadness. Not for what she took from us, but for what she missed. She had the opportunity to be part of something real. A genuine family built on love and mutual care. Instead, she chose to see us as marks. As resources to be exploited. She turned what could have been beautiful into something ugly. I wonder if she ever thinks about Max. If she remembers how he used to bring her his favorite toy when she was sad. How he'd rest his head on her feet while she watched television. How he'd wait by the door every morning, tail wagging, excited to see her arrive. Probably not. Dogs are probably just investments to her. Commodities with market value but no emotional worth. That's her loss, not ours. Max just turned 8 last week. I bought him a new toy, a squeaky hamburger that he carries around like a prize. We went to the beach for the first time since everything happened. He was nervous at first, staying close to my chair while other dogs played in the waves. But eventually, the joy of being a dog won out over his caution. He chased seagulls and dug holes in the sand, and came back to me dripping wet and grinning. Good boy, I told him, toweling off his fur. You remember how to have fun. He licked my face and settled down beside my chair, panting happily. Content. Safe. Home. We drove back as the sun was setting, Max's head hanging out the window, ears flapping in the breeze. At a red light, I looked over at him and felt something I hadn't felt in a year. Complete peace. Not happiness exactly, not the simple joy I'd felt when I thought Melvy and I were building a life together, but something deeper, more solid. The contentment that comes from accepting reality instead of chasing fantasies. Max has been with me for 8 years. Through a divorce, a cross-country move, an international relocation, illness, heartbreak, and recovery. He's never asked for anything except food, shelter, and affection. He's never betrayed my trust or taken more than he needed or pretended to be something he wasn't. He's never sold me out for $70 or dismissed my emotions as excessive. He's the only one who stayed. Tonight, he's sleeping beside my bed, one paw touching my hand. His breathing is deep and steady. Peaceful. No more nightmares about being tied up in strange places. No more anxiety about being abandoned. He trusts me again, maybe not completely, but enough. And I trust him completely, always have. Always will. Tomorrow we'll wake up together, like we have for over 3,000 mornings. We'll have breakfast and take our walk and spend another day being grateful for simple, uncomplicated loyalty. For love that doesn't ask for bank transfers or make excuses or disappear when things get difficult. People think I'm lonely now. They see me walking my aging dog through quiet neighborhoods and assume I'm missing something. Someone to share meals with. Someone to talk to in the evenings. Someone to make plans with. They're wrong. I'm not missing anything anymore. I found what I was looking for years ago. And he's sleeping right beside me. Gray muzzle, arthritic joints, cloudy eyes that still light up when I say his name. Perfect loyalty in an imperfect world. Love without conditions or expiration dates. Max is enough. He's always been enough. I just forgot that for a while, but I remember now. And I won't forget again.